on Digital Services Act. We at AmCham are truly committed to improving the business environment in Slovakia in order to increase the competitiveness of our economy. And we see innovation as a key engine for further growth of Slovak economy. That's why we at AmCham decided to include the innovation pillar at the forefront of our activities. That's why when discussions on the regulation of digital ecosystem are increasingly speeding up, we want to be actively involved in this process. And as representing the voice of the international business community in Slovakia, including member companies from 26 different states, including Slovak companies, we're glad we can partner with the Slovak Alliance for Innovation Economy together for this event.
Thank you, Michal, for your words. Actually, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you also on behalf of the Slovak Alliance for Innovation Economy. We represent more than 100 innovative and digital companies, not only from Slovakia, but from the whole world. And from the small companies, SMEs, to large companies. And we think that the topic of Digital Services Act and Digital Markets Act is absolutely crucial for the upcoming future of these digital and innovative companies. Therefore, we prepared this event for you, and we are really proud and happy that we've been able to put together various stakeholders, policymakers, and business community in Slovakia and also international community.
Indeed, Michal, the inclusion of all the important stakeholders, especially including the public stakeholders, is very important in this debate. And I would like to take this opportunity to especially appreciate the previous cooperation with the Ministry of Investments, Regional Development and Informatization, especially the Digital Agenda Department, on other digital-related topics over the last few years. And we're glad that, especially in terms of artificial intelligence and many other areas, we enjoy this good cooperation, and we're seen mutually as important partners for the debate. So thank you, Mr. Repa, for the previous engagement and previous cooperation. We hope that this topic will resonate over the next few months, and together in the dialogue between public and private sector, we will be able to move forward for the benefit of the Slovak economy.
And without further ado, we are coming here to the studio. Welcome everybody one more time. Thank you, gentlemen, for introducing this debate today, organized again by SAPIE and American Chamber of Commerce on Digital Services Act and Digital Markets Act of the CEE perspective, which we will be discussing particularly today. As many of you know, this discussion will be mostly related to upcoming legislation that the European Commission will be introducing tomorrow, although the introductory date was already kind of postponed, so the actual date will be tomorrow. We're still going to discuss its basis, some frameworks. We will talk about discussion that is going on in Slovakia, in Czech Republic, and in other Central European countries. We will look into what the customers are expecting, but especially what industry may be expecting. And that's why we have the best panel that we could actually today. So let me introduce shortly, firstly, Mr. Ivan Stefanec, member of the European Parliament, who's connecting from Brussels. He's also a member of the Committee on the Internal Market and Customers Protection. Welcome. Thank you for connecting.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody.
Radoslav Repa, already mentioned, Director of Digital Agenda at the Ministry of Innovation, Regional Development and Informatization of Slovak Republic. Thank you very much for coming in.
Hello and good afternoon to everybody.
Good. From Brno, from Czech Republic, Mr. Ondřej Ferdus is Director of Digital Economy Unit of the Czech Confederation of Industry. Thank you very much for logging in as well.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Perfect. And Mr. Martin Husovec, Assistant Professor at the London School of Economics, also an expert on the digital agenda. Thank you also for connecting in.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
And of course, thank you very much, all of you participants that logged in today to this webinar. We will also, we would like to involve you absolutely into this discussion, and that's why we would like to take questions. As it was said, this is only a first debate. We are expecting to have much more debates, but this is really a floor to really to really ask our experts what we are expecting. So in order to ask, please log into Slido application. Yes, we can see it, and join with the hashtag DSA, DMA, Digital Services Act and Digital Markets Act. So let's start. Let's start with Mr. Husovec, who is actually an expert, as I said, on the digital agenda. So in order for us to understand what we are going to be dealing with from tomorrow on, when the discussions will actually start, could you please introduce what is the framework of it and what the legislation is going to actually be about?
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for this kind invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here with these distinguished guests. So since I have 4 minutes, I thought I'll split my time wisely, which is to spend 2 minutes to describe last 20 years and 2 minutes to describe future 20 years. Perfect. I hope that works. So let me start with last 20 years. So basically, the entire saga of the digital e-commerce in Europe started from the regulatory perspective in 2000 when the EU adopted e-commerce directive. And e-commerce directive was, directive, meaning that a member state really had to implement the law on the national level. And it really had two main tools that remain important also pretty much until today. So first of all, the country of origin principle, which is basically a rule deciding on who can regulate information society service provider, which is the definition that we used before platforms, gatekeepers, and all these kind of fancy words came into fashion. And then second, the tool of liability safe harbor. So basically certain provisions that made it clear that providers of online services won't be liable for third-party content or activities as long as they meet certain criteria. So let me first say something about these two tools, assess it, and then we quickly look at what is ahead. So country of origin principle is very important, and although it doesn't get that much coverage, I'm pretty sure it will be at the heart of the DSA, because it's the main tool that allows the EU to avoid fragmentation. Basically, it allows us to decide that the primary regulator of activities is the country where a particular business decides to incorporate, so where it's established. And for large amount of activities, this is the regulator that matters. And this principle is important to avoid fragmentation. So the fact that one and the same firm is subject to 27 different types of laws, because not everything is obviously harmonized. So if you follow what is happening before the Court of Justice in the recent case law, Uber, Airbnb, and similar kinds of services see clearly that if they fall under definition of information society service providers and are covered by the country of origin principle, it makes a huge difference because they cannot be regulated in the same way as if they're outside of this. Second, liability regulation mechanism. Basically, we have a set of safe harbors that specify certain type of activities. On the application layer, the most important one is hosting providers, which basically shield certain service provider that allows storage of information at a request of users from liability. But it doesn't really specify under what conditions liability is imposed on the national level, doesn't come up with any enforcement provisions. It's basically just a coordination device to avoid that member states impose strict liability in many scenarios. So assessment after 20 years is basically this framework has worked really well. I think it was a huge success, but at the same time it has certain flaws basically connected with the fact that it was a framework. And framework obviously couldn't foresee all kinds of problems that we see today, and obviously couldn't deliver harmonization because it was just trying to avoid fragmentation on some very rudimentary level. So so fast forward to today, basically looking at 20 years ahead, what we have in front of us is actually 3 different acts. So DSA, DMA, and DGA. The last one, perhaps a little bit less known, but equally important, covering data. But DSA and DMA kind of coming in the environment where we have this big tech platforms that kind of dominate and increasingly concentrate the space, and we're trying to figure out how to go ahead. So on the liability front and on the country of origin front, this is what this will be regulated by the DSA, Digital Services Act. And there clearly we see that a commission will just do incremental, supplementary, complementary changes, not necessarily some radical overhaul. All of those changes were asked for by academia for a long time because we knew that this is kind of unsustainable to have these kind of large gaps between the member states. Member states didn't properly use these spaces for experimentation. So we are seeing something that I think many asked for a long time. We need more harmonization on notification frameworks, liability enforcement, safeguards, particularly for freedom of expression, etc., etc. On the Digital Markets Act, this is a little bit more complicated because it's connected with the EU's view that we're lagging behind when it comes to digital markets, and that we should increase the contestability of the markets and basically allow the European champions to rise by challenging the big, mostly US, but increasingly also Chinese tech platforms. So the measures there are ex ante measures. Basically, it's a certain type of regulation that is coming ahead, and I guess we can discuss details during the debate.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much for this introduction. So we see that there is a development of last 20 years, and we are preparing something that will be definitely changing another upcoming years. Let's look into the perspective of the European Parliament, because Mr. Ivan Stefanec, as the Slovak representative at the European Parliament, you were following closely the overview of the context, how the whole legislation is being prepared. You may also have some kind of anticipation how it is going to influence economies, markets, especially such maybe smaller one as the Slovak is. So could you maybe elaborate a little bit more on the process of, or on the idea of reforming the whole regulation on the digital services, Mr. Stefanec?
Thank you very much. Yes, sure, I would be happy to do so. First of all, let me highlight that Digital Services Act and Digital Markets Act will be very, very important pieces of legislation, as it was already said. We have in place 20 years old legislation, which was e-commerce directive, so it's time to change. Also, taking into consideration the whole situation, then digital services and digital skills will be decisive for the success or not success of the whole economical performance. I think this is really crucial. Also, from the perspective of digital single market, we have to build infrastructure skills, but we have to prepare the appropriate legal framework. And from this point of view, DSA and DMA are the key pieces of legislation. What is important, it was also stressed out in the last report, which was 2 months ago, implemented in the European Parliament. In this report, we recommended basically our key points to the European Commission, what should be included in DSA and DMA. And there are 3 most important points. First one was we have to define what is the platform. We don't have this definition yet. We have to define what is platform, and also at the same time, we have to define who is a gatekeeper, because to determine whether an online platform has become a gatekeeper for other providers due to its size and reach, it must be established. There are clear-cut criteria. Secondly, we recommended to set up an effective ex-ante competitive tool, because it's essential to obtain a quick and unbureaucratic change of unfair behavior of gatekeeper platforms, and it is regardless of their market share and market size. And thirdly, this is my favorite point, we have to protect small players. Because of competitive environment, we know that this business is run mostly by major players. We have to find the fair and stable competitive environment. So we have to protect small players, and with the revision of e-commerce directive and in particular the liability provisions for illegal offers, distinction needs to be made between large platforms and small platforms with a manageable user base based on clear standards, so as not to overburden small platforms. I think it is very, very important. Those are 3 key points, but let me mention also other 3 points which are also quite crucial, and that's what we are talking on, and we are working on the European Parliament. We are talking about responsibility for illegal contents, and this should be responsibility for platforms. There must be clear rules also who is responsible and who should remove illegal content. Another point is also interoperability. There must be some kind of interoperability guarantee because this would allow cooperation between different systems and services that are compatible with each another, and I'm absolutely sure it would be beneficial, particularly for consumer. And last but not least, enforcement is the issue. If we have some legislation in the place, it must be enforced. We need to have clear, stable rules, and the same rules for everybody, for small players, for big players. So therefore, since beginning of this legislation or since beginning of this proposal, we talk about effective enforcement, which is also very important. So my remarks. So thank you.
Yes, so 6 points, very important, clear definitions for the gatekeepers, for platforms particularly, ex-ante rules on competitive rules, protection of small players, small and media players, enforcement, interoperability, and responses to the illegal content. Those are all the elements that the new legislation should be coming up with. We will see how it will be actually executed tomorrow. But the discussions were going on. We're going on not only at the European level, but at the national level. And what I will be now interested in is how the discussion or attention was executed, particularly in Czech Republic, because Czech Republic actually approached this question slightly differently than Slovak Republic. So maybe Mr. Ferdus can tell us about the national responses there, and particularly how your association contributed to whole debate.
Thank you very much. As some of the previous speakers, for us, the Digital Services Act, for anyone who is active in the digital agenda or in the EU regulation, everybody knows that it is the key piece of legislation. And for the recent years, and we as a Czech Republic, we believe because it's such a big piece of legislation, and not only the DSA but also the DMA, we believe that it might be finalized during the Czech presidency in the second half of 2022. So we are paying a very close attention to this since the early beginning. Also in the Confederation, we have it in our priorities for the government since we first heard of it. Luckily, we have an amazing team of experts in our Ministry of Industry and Trade, also in our permanent representation to the European Union. So we managed to start the discussions in Czech Republic pretty early. I believe we started them when the public consultation started. And we, in cooperation with our member companies and associations, we came up with the concept of the so-called policy DSA workshops, which had several goals due to the relatively early stage of the discussions about the forthcoming package. A large number of companies were still, they are still now, they have a bit of a vague ideas about the possible impacts of the regulation. So we decided to devote these policy workshops to start the debate on the national level. And from the early beginning, because the Ministry of Industry and Trade usually it's customary for them to consult with the sector during the legislative process. So we didn't want them to do it to do the same job twice. So we partnered up with the Ministry of Industry and Trade. We talked to the Deputy Minister for Digitalization in Czech Republic, and we teamed up. We started these policy workshops with the biggest associations and organizations in Czech Republic, also the most relevant players. We tried to keep it under 30 participants on each of the workshops. And we started in June. And since December, we had about 6 workshops. We discussed all the possible areas of the Digital Services Act. And we managed to give the ministry our input for the public consultation. So I believe it was a very fruitful discussion, very fruitful start of the forthcoming discussions in Czech Republic.
Could you maybe specify a little bit more the main points of that discussion, just maybe very briefly, so that we know what the Czech industry particularly is interested about?
Oh, well, I cannot talk much about the DMA and the very
maybe a preliminary within the preliminary discussion. I mean, obviously.
Okay. Well, we welcome the Commission's initiative to propose the update for the e-commerce directive. We agree with the Commission that there is a space for updating the rules for the internet, and we want to be a partner in the discussions. That's for sure. Nevertheless, from our point of view, there are no easy fixes, and there is no one-size-fits-all approach. So we need to keep in mind that poorly designed legislation could undermine the effective principles of the e-commerce directive, and we are convinced that we need to keep the core of e-commerce directive principles, such as the country of origin principle, the limited liability regime, as well as the prohibition of general monitoring obligation as fundamental cornerstones of the European platform economy and any new regulation framework. And we believe that we need to also keep in mind there were initiatives before, as the Copyright Directive, Platform to Business Regulation, Goods Package, Audiovisual Media, and others. So we need to also pay attention to these to avoid the risk of overlapping with the new regulation.
Exactly. Thank you very much for this. Mr. Repa, let's look into the Slovak position and early position, maybe some main points which Slovak Republic would like to have or would like to find in that discussion, because obviously we've heard that digital economy will be absolutely affected by the whole legislation. So what is the preliminary position or like early expectations of the Ministry of Informatization?
First of all, thank you for having me here. I really appreciate the presence of distinguished guests here. Sorry, I missed the last 20 seconds, unfortunately.
No, that's all right. I was asking about the Slovak government's early position towards the two legislation that are upcoming.
Perfect. First of all, I would like to thank you, Lucia, for having me here. I really enjoy the presence of distinguished guests around the table, even though that we don't see each other by face, but some distance. And that especially I would like to thank Tapia and Amchen for organizing this quite expert seminar on the very hot topic of today, of the digital agenda. As regards our position, the Slovakian position, I can only say at this very preliminary moment that we welcome the European Commission's initiative to pass on the new rules in the single digital market, which aim to foster innovation and competitiveness. We support the core principles set by the e-commerce directive, as it was already mentioned by my several speakers here, like, for example, the country of origin principle, the limited liability regime, or ban on the general monitoring, which over time became, it was said here, cornerstone, or very quintessential principle in regulating digital services in the EU and still very good today. However, we see a need to reflect on profound changes in the digital world, which could not have been even foreseen at a time when the e-commerce directive entered into force. Actually, it's 20 years, and like GDPR. I mean, let's say data protection directive before, it belongs to the quite very good legislative proposals which actually survived 2 decades. And so congratulations for the drafters in a way. We have seen that online platforms have gained economic dominance over the smaller economic players. Digital media and online content and are greatly shaping our perception of everyday world and affecting the way we see things. Of course, online advertisement has taken by storm websites that we browse daily, or our children are exposed to illegal and harmful online content more even ever, and we could continue like this. As regards our position, we would like to see, because the publication date is foreseen tomorrow, new criteria or maybe specified criteria for actors and services to which these principles may not be applied. There may be a need for updates on the definition of digital service, like information society service as it was defined 20 years ago. It would be great to come up with the definition of gatekeeper platforms, like Mr. Stefanec from Parliament said. We would like to see DSA to clearly define notice and action mechanism, as this might be a quite pertinent and quite sensitive issue for many. And I could keep on like this. As regards the position of our republic, well, we are a state body, so we will initiate and we will ignite the whole train of successive steps which will follow. We would plan to open up a questionnaire for companies, for stakeholders who are concerned. I have to admit that we already prepared this, but we need to wait now for Tuesday what's there, because we only, let's say, we had some expectations what might be in the directive, but maybe the regulation, but we would be surprised, maybe not. So give us a little bit more time, and before Christmas there will be a questionnaire for you. So it will be the start of legislative procedure in Slovakia. Then we will come up for so-called national position, which will end up in the parliament in the end, in the European Affairs Committee. And with that, we have a national mandate for negotiations for my colleagues in the Prime Representation in Brussels for the Council. What is important to say on our behalf that MIRI, as the Ministry on Investment and in abbreviated form Digital Agenda, we are still discussing who would be the owner of legislation, given that the previous ones were focused more towards Ministry of Economy. And it was not our ministry at that time, or finance ministry. So because platforms to business regulation and the previous one, including e-commerce, actually are files which are attributed not towards MIRI but economy ministry. For the time being, and for the moment, we are keeping very intensive discussions, and I stay at your disposal, and I look forward to your some other questions to have. Thank you.
Absolutely, they will come on. And just to wrap up the Slovak innovation environment, let's go back to you. Michal Kardoš, I didn't introduce you one more time, but yeah, it was said you're an executive director of the Slovak Alliance for the Innovation Economy. Maybe you can give us a little bit of overview of the debate that was going on in Slovakia. How do you see that this topic, how important we've seen, how this importance of this topic resonated locally? We also have a question here over on the slide that we've heard that the debate in Czech Republic has already started. How it is in Slovakia and with the innovation industry?
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you very much for introduction. I would like to start with. Well, I can say that we started discussion about DSA and DMA, DSA during the summer when we submitted our proposals to the consultation process of the European Commission. And the reason for that is that we represent, as I said, innovative and digital companies. And we realized that Slovakia has a great opportunity with digital economy, and we are far from reaching the full potential. So there is still a lot of room to grow. The importance of the, let me say a few general words maybe at the beginning. the importance of the digital economy has become even more evident since the COVID-19 pandemic. And on the one hand, going online was really a lifeline for many of our members and also for many other businesses in Slovakia to continue and to be able to reach their customers, while measures to restrict the spread of the disease were introduced. On the other hand, the rapidness of the transition to the digital space during such a short time period was unexpected. For example, according to McKinsey, the number of people in CEE who have accessed at least one online service has risen by 15% points since the start of COVID-19 pandemic, which is pretty obvious. And McKinsey also found that compared to their 2018 research, the 2019 digital economy in CEC was 2% above their previously forecasted 2019 business as usual scenario. We think that it is absolutely crucial that Slovak companies and by extension the customers, not only in Slovakia but in the European Union, are able to tap into this potential into the future. And I think we should aim high and be inspired by countries of similar size that consider digital innovators such as Northern Europe, Estonia, in terms of both digitalization efforts as such as well as regulatory approaches. But let me to conclude just the first part. We think that DSA and DMA will be and is probably the most significant regulatory initiative since the GDPR. We can be sure that it will touch nearly every aspect of the digital economy and set rules for the years to come. And obviously for us it is important that these rules strike the right balance between strengthening the digital single market, supporting innovation, and let's say protecting consumers. So this is basically how we perceive this initiative and the upcoming legislation.
Thank you, Michal, for framing this also for the Slovak and Central European industry. Let me go back to Brussels and to Mr. Stefanec, because you've already mentioned that particularly for the smaller and medium-sized countries and small and medium-sized companies, this legislation may be extremely crucial, also because we have them here, and many of them, and representatives of many of them are also participants at this webinar. So my question is, how well do you think that those interests of countries like Slovakia, maybe like Czech Republic, are going to be represented in these discussions, in this whole agenda that is coming up? Because obviously the discussion will be formally kind of kicked off tomorrow with presenting the whole legislation. How can Slovakia be participating enough so that it represents the small and medium companies that it has?
Yes, I think it's very important to be very active in this discussion. And I think the Slovakia and Slovak representatives can participate in these discussions in three ways. First one is via our representation in Brussels, as for example, Mr. Repa has a great experience and he has done extremely good job as Slovak representative, part of Slovak representation in Brussels. Secondly, via business organization, which are very, very active in Brussels. Business Europe is the most active, but also Digital Europe and other ones. And thirdly, via members of European Parliament, because in this case, European Parliament is decisive in this legislation. So everybody, all the stakeholders can approach respective MEPs, members of European Parliament, and I'm more than welcome all the players and all the inputs because it's necessary to take into consideration all the aspects of this key legislation. And to conclude this, I'd like to highlight what you have mentioned already, that this this is really key legislation, and also digital economy is key for Central Europe. Therefore, it's a tool also how to develop our countries, how to speed up the process, and to help to growth economically. And at the end, of course, it can be reflected in better quality of life of our citizens. So I'm absolutely sure this is very, very important pieces of legislation, not only for small players, not only for business players, but also for all the citizens. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this, for also giving some information to the representatives. What are the ways to actually be active, particularly at the European level? But we've seen also the activities that are going on amongst the countries. So, for instance, Czech Republic actually started to cooperate with a couple of Northern European countries, including Poland. They created a so-called D9 group, issued a joint paper on the topic. So this is the type of cooperation that may also have some kind of better relevance in the future. Mr. Ferdus, what draws this coalition of the member states and industries together, firstly, and do you expect them to play some kind of important role within this upcoming discussion that we will be having?
Thank you very much. Well, first, let me say that I was a little bit worried that when Mr. Cardos was speaking about the most innovative countries, that he will be mentioning Czech Republic. Please don't. The digitalization of the Czech public services isn't that good yet. And back to your question, well, there are a few things. After the Brexit, we've lost a big ally in the digital agenda. The Great Britain was a strong leader of the like-minded group, and now the D9 plus countries, where the UK is also a part of, and I'm so proud and so happy that Czech Republic and also Poland joined this group and are able to sit at one table with these front runners in the digital agenda, such as the other countries, because they are the top 9 countries in the DESI index in Europe. So that's one thing that we're grateful that Czech Republic is part, and that the whole concept of this like-minded group is liberal, and I think it reflects that these are liberal and open economies. And all of them are smaller member states. Some of them are newer member states, but they are the front runners, as I already said. And these coalitions, I think, will be crucial now. And we kind of see it because there is a lot of protectionism coming from bigger member states, such as Germany and France, during the past few years. And we all, I think, feel that it's getting a bit stronger every year, and so I think these coalitions will be very crucial for the negotiations, not only for the DSA and DMA. And what we are doing, we're trying to work not only with the D9 plus, but within the Confederation of Industry, together with our Vice President Milena Eburka. We're trying for a few years to activate more the CEE region itself, because there are 10 new member states of the European Union, smaller ones, which have great potential, but they haven't been heard yet. And I think I might say that this year we've managed to join them together, at least in the field of artificial intelligence, and the voices of the CE region were heard in the European Commission and the European Union before the upcoming AI regulation. And last week we had also an event on the DSA, and so I'm grateful that all our friends from CE and Slovakia are realizing the great potential, and they are being more active than we all were before, because we felt that before only Poland and then maybe Czech Republic were a bit more active in digital agenda, but even in Czech Republic, it's something which we are doing more intensively for the past 4 or 5 years.
Mr. Husovec, I will jump directly to you, and following up with what Mr. Ferdus just said. There seems to be some kind of coalitions that are being built across Europe. There is going to be obviously a difference between how this new legislation will be approached by bigger countries and by the smaller countries. Where do you see, from some kind of expert point of view, the main differences that we will be seeing when it comes to big and smaller countries and their power influencing this legislation?
Thank you very much for the question. I think the big difference is that the countries that anticipated DSA and wanted to influence the debate before the proposal by the Commission is unveiled were preparing for this debate already 2 years ago. So I vividly remember I had a meeting with the people from the Dutch Ministries of Economy about what should happen with the country of origin principle something like 2 years ago. And the reason for that was exactly what was already mentioned, as the UK leaving the EU left a void, and countries like the Netherlands realized that they need allies, because not all other countries necessarily see anti-protectionist agenda in the same way. So that's more or less why we see these kind of coalitions forming. But I think the main gap on the side of the small countries, and this is what I see all the time, and I might be overly critical as academic, but is the fact that small countries basically are not well prepared. And this is, I'm not necessarily only saying this on the side of the sort of the public public servant side, but it's also about the private sector. Really looking at countries like the Netherlands, they had a position well formed and prepared and discussed very early on, and they were discussing with academics and what kind of solutions would be possible. So this is the first thing I see, that if you go into a debate and someone is well prepared 2 years ahead of time, I think you're never going to have the same opportunity to counter whatever comes through. The second thing, obviously, and this is on the substance, I think I don't necessarily fear too much that what we'll see is that somehow the smaller member states will be disadvantaged in this case, because clearly the main reason why at least DMA is being put forward is actually against the tech giants coming from the US, to a very limited extent from China. So I don't necessarily see there as a collateral that we have some collateral on our players, because if the gatekeepers will be defined as is currently anticipated, namely large gatekeepers, we basically don't have them, and I'm not aware of any Slovak or Czech big gatekeeper that would potentially be regulated there. So DSA is what we are kind of looking at then, and a DSA with its emphasis on asymmetric obligations when it comes to the sort of proactive measures. Again, I don't necessarily see that as a problem for small and medium companies. Obviously, I'm not a stakeholder, so I don't have to raise this flag before it's there. But I'm just saying that I don't necessarily see this happening.
I see. And when you were saying that obviously the smaller countries are not really prepared, so maybe you are referring to the discussion. What do you think that they should do in order to kind of cross that gap, like start on with the discussion, or what would be some kind of a substantive issue to cross that gap, to really add on? And
I'm not sure that now is still. I mean, now we'll be just reactive to whatever the Commission says.
Okay.
Exactly what the Commission says as an agenda. So what I was referring to was being preemptive and basically forming what the Commission will draft in its regulatory proposals, which obviously are informed by whatever member states were thinking of doing. So ex ante regulation, influenced largely by thinking of coming from some of the member states. DSA perhaps a little bit more universal. So still at this point, it's very important that we inform community, the business community, user community, properly about what is going on so they can form their opinion. And then we have our MEPs, as was already mentioned, actually channeling that through. Because I've seen some debates where this wasn't working well, that the MEPs would actually channel through the concerns of the citizens. And now I'm referring to the copyright debate. So I think it's important now to be properly prepared to be reactive, but I'm just saying that we have already missed the chance to frame that discussion. I think now we're reacting to whatever is already framed.
And to reformulate, while we are reacting, how to react properly in order not to be swallowed by the bigger markets? That's my question.
Yeah, good. Well, I think it's important that media properly report on this piece of legislation early on what this means. We try to talk within business communities what this means to for our companies. That we take the law seriously, because seriously, when we look at the e-commerce directive and the way it's implemented in the Slovak legislation, it's a joke. Don't even look at the safe harbors and the way they implement it. They are mistranslated. This is basically the 2004 binge translation that was never fixed in the act about electronic commerce. So I would say let's take it seriously this time and try to explain this, because these might be rules, and this time it will be EU rules. It will be regulation. And it might be really have a really real teeth, like the GDPR, that can have real impact on the ground. So let's take it seriously, and let's inform, let's discuss, let's have debates like this with the particular firms, trying them to understand what this will mean for them. And I think this is the best way how to get the sense of what people actually think about these upcoming rules. Sorry.
Mr. Repa, maybe you can also elaborate on this, because there is a clear. We get some questions regarding the fact that the debate in Slovakia wasn't really evolved. My question is: are we really lacking behind from your point of view, and what will be changing upcoming maybe days, months?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I was hoping that everybody would be very supportive to each other, and now we have a little controversy. I have to say no, absolutely, I don't agree. I just fully disagree with the opinion of Mr. Husavec on this issue. I don't think that we already missed the train. We've been discussing this on the proper levels with already concerned parties and involved stakeholders for I don't know how long, maybe years. It started before actually platforms to business regulation from the very early eve of our presidency, I mean Slovakian presidency in the council. So the discussions are still upheld and nobody really sees them. Let me kindly react on, let's say, the coalition forming, and this is what I agree with Mr. Husavec, and this is that really we have to, let's say, form a good basis for a solid pertinence of our, let's say, small countries' opinions and the standpoints in a mind-like group. My Czech colleague here already mentioned that we, let's say, formed a part of this coalition for about 6-7 years already. This is a group of 12, 13 countries, very this, let's say, convergence and similar views on the legislation, like this platform legislation is. And I have to say that we've been discussing this for some time, and with the clear vision. We already formed a basis that maybe 4 countries alongside Visegrad 4 alliance, we are admitting the principles of e-commerce. I think all countries are on the same page. Mm-hmm. Maybe we do differ as regards the supervision of the concerned authorities, how to actually watchdog the situation, and maybe if we are able, and if we have enough capacities, experts or financial ones to, let's say, fight with the giants, or better to confer this competence over one body within the, let's say, European agencies, or maybe to form a new one. Maybe we would differ on this, but as regards the majority of the challenges already proposed by the Commission, or would be proposed by the Commission, we can be in the one line. The same with the Netherlands, Belgium, maybe Luxembourg, the same with the Scandinavians, and maybe the same with Baltics. So maybe Romania and Bulgaria, as it is the case, would join. And now we have a very solid, let's say, group of states who can really somehow level up some moves by France, maybe Spain, maybe Germany. We will see in practice. But I have to completely disregard the issues that we miss some debate, some communication. You have to take into consideration that Slovakia still fights with the structural problems from roads to environmental issues as regards to the financial and structural stability. So alongside these issues, I think that the ministries formed a very solid platform for having European legislation in form. E-commerce directive actually is a directive over 20 years. And it was not somehow transposed in our legislation. It was approximated at the time when we entered the Union. At that time, there was a big, let's say, load on the people from government office to translate, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of pages of documents. Of course, it happened that some translation missed the points and the topics, and in the subsequent let's say updates and let's say new legislation which actually Commission came with, we completely helped to change the improper semantics. With that, I said it's 20 years old, so now it waits for its time, and with that we will completely look down and look into it. So thank you for this.
But I will not let you yet. Maybe I would like to also know what are your anticipations regarding the benefits that are coming in with this new legislation for the Slovak companies, and what are potential perhaps risks that companies and the industry may be facing from once the legislation is approved?
Maybe look at it from the twofold perspective. First, I'm not sure whether there are some significant platforms operating within the Slovakian markets to affect them properly. It will affect the global giants. So let's put this straight. There are some, and therefore we have to safeguard the principle of e-commerce, that the platforms are not held liable for the content or maybe for some other operations which are performed on that platform. So Merconduit principle and let's say safe harbor principle, issues on the ban of general monitoring, those are of a major importance. On the second hand, we have to be very cautious if our regulatory authorities are capable enough, let's say, to see some, let's say, misconsistency and misproper lead of European acquis. And therefore, we have to be very sensible as regards who should be the, let's say, authority to keep or maybe to watch the gatekeepers. So, but as regards for regular companies, I'm not sure whether it will have a profound negative impact as regards what I heard and what I have seen so far, even though unofficially the principles of e-commerce directive are not going to be amended substantially. Mm-hmm. So there are some derogations, and we have to watch those derogations. What I would like to, let's say, I should be afraid of going in the same way like it was during the deliberations in the parliament of a so-called copyright directive. So because it changed completely the world of how we see or how we look on some immunity of platforms before some content is uploaded. Secondly, the same may be valid with the, for example, former ruling of a European Human Rights Court in Strasbourg on so-called Delphi's case in Estonia, because it was some prejudice towards already valid, let's say, regime and the culture, how to interpret this e-commerce directive as regards the journals and some dialogues after news is published.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for this. Before I will go to Michal, to you, there is a raised hand, and I am not really sure who is it. I think it's Mr. Ferduš who wanted to react. If I am, yes.
Yes,
please.
Thank you very much. I would like to react on Mr. Husovec because I also don't really agree with his statement, because the smaller states aren't. I think there is no problem with their not being prepared. We talk every week or month with our partners from CEE region and from other countries, and we see how well they are actually prepared. There are more problems with that. In some countries, there is still a lack of dialogue between the businesses, the academic sphere, and the government, because the governments are afraid that they're being lobbied, and they don't see the added value from the businesses. Because we see it in Czech Republic. I have to because we have an amazing relationship with the ministry, and it's well functioning because we both realize there is something for us. We know obviously that we can somehow influence the debate on the proposals, and the ministry knows that we can give them the practical examples, the everyday examples. So this is something what we see in some of the countries in the CEE region being the problem, because the business organizations and the companies, they are prepared. They have the positions. They're very well prepared. The problem is a lack of dialogue between the governments and the ministries and the organizations. I know it's impossible to speak with each company on a separate level, but I mean, that's why we have the associations, we have the organizations, and we as an organization, we can give our ministry, I mean, we represent 11,000 companies. So when we come to the ministry with a joint paper of our companies, we give them one opinion of these companies, and they don't have to deal with 11,000 companies. So my advice is just speak with the academic sector, speak with the governments, and with your business sectors.
So better dialogue in general. Michal, to you, I already started kind of open up that topic, but what are the preliminary expectations, particularly from the point of view of industries? What are the priorities that Slovak industry sector and innovative industry sector have, and what could be possible red flags for them as well?
Thank you very much. Maybe I would like to react to what has been just said. The reason why we are organizing this event is also to connect the public sphere and the private sphere. And we hope, and also you said that at the beginning, that we will continue in this conversation in the upcoming month. I would say that, and I also mentioned that we prepared our position on behalf of our association, and we also joined the forces with other associations in Central and Eastern Europe, and we prepared our main key points on the upcoming legislation. So I would say that the private sphere is working in this area. Associations are preparing their positions on behalf of their members and companies in the country, in the different countries. So now it is maybe more about joining the forces, and that's what we are just doing now. But coming back to your question, we will, of course, closely analyze the proposals once they are published and consult them with our members, as we did it also during the consultation process in the summer. Generally, we can say that we support the effort to truly complete the digital single market, which will be to the benefit of both consumers and companies in Slovakia and in Europe. There are obviously certain aspects that have already been widely discussed in the lead up to the publication, and I can share now with you some of the main points. When it comes to DSA, we see a broad industry consensus on the fact that the e-commerce directive has supported innovation and growth of the economy, not only the digital economy, but the economy as a whole. While there has been a rapid technological development since it was adopted 20 years ago, and of course new issues have since popped up that should be addressed, we are in favor of an evolution rather than revolution. And we think that the key principles of e-commerce directive should be maintained. Now let me touch upon these main principles. We think that the country of origin, which allows entrepreneurs to operate in the EU according to the law of the state they reside in. This very principle provides an opportunity for newly developed European innovative products and services to enter new markets and dynamically expand. The second point, or the second key principle, is focus on illegal content. The new framework should be clear and increase legal certainty, and that's what we what we highlight, and that's what we focus on: legal certainty. Legal but harmful content such as disinformation should be tackled separately, we think, and it is not universally agreed upon, and would be unsustainable for SMEs to be burdened by such obligations. Maybe the next point would be, or the next key principles would be the prohibition of general monitoring obligations that need to balance the need to address known issues with the need to maintain fundamental rights and freedoms. And maybe some other key principles should be also maintained, such as the notice and takedown mechanism or intermediary liability. So this is on when it comes to DSA, our key principles that we also included in our position, and as I said, we agreed on these key principles with other associations within the CEE region.
Good. So there are several. There is also the response to whether the dialogue between industry is working, and it seems that in Slovakia it is working. Kind of developing on what you, Michal, said, Mr. Husovec, you've heard a couple of items that Slovak industry is expecting, evolution instead of revolution, a couple of particular items regarding the differentiation between smaller companies and their responsibilities and larger online platforms. Also the principle of what is online, what is illegal offline should be illegal also online. That's one of the Slovak stances. What do you make out of those expectations? Do you think they are going to be fulfilled, or do you see that there are some other red flags that probably industry should be looking at?
Well, I think those points that were mentioned probably generally will be the building blocks. So I don't necessarily see this as a big overhaul on the DSA front. But I think what we should be debating is where the change will be taking place on margins, and that is what type of proactive measures will be acceptable, what kind of redress will we implement to prevent the instances of overblocking. Who will be in charge to be able to decide on asymmetric obligations? How far-reaching transparency obligations will be? So I think those points that were mentioned are kind of the main points. I think, unless there are big surprises, I think they are behind the thinking, behind the Commission's effort so far. But I think the magic and the most important stuff happens on the margins, and I think there's a lot of small debates that have big consequences that perhaps are worth investigating a little bit more than whether we preserve safe harbors. I think we preserve safe harbors, clearly. The question is, will we resolve the question of passive-active? My guess is not. No one wants to touch this. But the question will be, what kind of preventive measures will there be? Will there be European legal basis for this or not? Probably yes. Who exactly will be subject to this? So I think those are the issues that are perhaps require that we want to know most about, because those can have impact in the DSA context on the small and medium-sized European and particularly Slovak companies.
So no bigger red flags from your point of view. So for instance, let's imagine that you are one of our participants that are watching us online. They are representing industries, and tomorrow they will see the legislation. What should they be looking for at the first place, in your opinion?
Okay, well, they should definitely look at whether anything happens with the passive-active distinction in the safe harbors. My guess is nothing.
What could you elaborate on this a little bit more? What does it mean?
Court of Justice over the years narrowed down the application of the hosting safe harbor to only so-called passive services, and ever since, basically, this entire debate about whether you're covered by the safe harbor or not has been sort of waged on the battlefield of, are you active or passive? So basically, is YouTube, for instance, storing videos active or passive? Because if it's passive, it's covered by the safe harbor. If it's active, then it's not, and basically, it's totally left to the national law. And the same goes for Facebook and whatever service you name. So this is kind of a proxy debate for this. Second, I would look at being concerned about the freedom of expression. I would be concerned whether the Commission has taken, to what extent Commission also wants to deal with not only illegal but also harmful content. From my perspective, it's not something that cannot be done to deal with harmful content, but I would be very careful. And we cannot apply the same principles to harmful content. Really careful there. Second, I would really watch out, and I will watch out for whatever proactive measures that are imposed. I think generally proactive measures should be possible, but should be really made conditional upon some failings in the underlying system of just responding to notifications. I will look at how effective transparency obligations are likely to be, and what kind of safeguards are the users getting in case their content gets blocked, even though it shouldn't have been blocked. Is there effective alternative dispute resolution? What kind of financing mechanism is attached to it? What is the recourse to courts? So these are the things I will be looking at primarily. But
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
One more thing to this. Once the new legislation will be introduced, and probably later on, over a couple of months after the discussions will be adopted, do you expect that there will be some financials measured from the side of the industry involved in it? Will, very, very bluntly asking, what will be or where will be the places where my company, let's say, will go on and have increased expenses when this legislation once comes into force?
So now, DMA, I cannot tell. I mean, this is open box, and doesn't really concern most of the Slovak companies. Rather, it will be on the beneficiary side. So Slovak companies will benefit from increased contestability of the markets if we enable this. So companies, rather, there will be beneficiaries of data sharing, will be beneficiaries of a ban on ban on self-preferencing from the side of gatekeepers. So these kind of things. I think there we should explain to Slovak companies how they can benefit from increased portability, interoperability that we are expecting, and all these kind of things against big platforms. When it comes to DSA, I think there the story will be, I don't necessarily think that there will be increased cost. What we'll see, though, is it will be some sort of standardization of how things should be handled, which should be to the benefit of everyone, because it's frankly mess on the European scale. And, in many areas, we are even applying US law just to make it easier on ourselves. So I think I don't necessarily see big costs that would be sort of implied in complying with the new rules on notice and action, for instance. To the contrary, what I rather see is standardization of this, increased legal certainty for the consumers, and possibly, hopefully, also stronger measures on how to get their content reinstated in case their content is blocked. So this is what I see. Now, some companies maybe will be uneasy about transparency that is coming. There's clearly transparency on content moderation policies and on the number of takedowns and dealings with the government. And I think that's a good thing. That's perhaps a cost that the companies didn't have before. But again, if you're a small and medium Slovak company, unless, of course, you are somehow globally active and have a really large number of requests coming from the outside governments, when it comes to only Slovak market, you're unlikely to have a lot to report. But again, it's an extra cost. I think, though, it's a beneficial thing.
And keeping up with the risks and benefits, let's also look and wrap it up with the Czech Republic. Mr. Ferduš, what do you think are going to be the key risks for your market, and also the benefits that are going to be coming?
Well, I will speak more general way, because we didn't see the regulation, and we didn't discuss all the aspects of the possible regulation within our membership, which is one of the risks I see as firstly protectionism. As I already mentioned, we see it in every regulation or every initiative coming from the EU in the past few months or years. So there might be some attempt in various areas of the digital economy. Also, since there will be a lot of different views and positions on DSA, maybe more on a DMA than on a DSA, it won't be a very easy discussion, and not only within the B2C in the B2C, but also in the B2B. Within our organization, I can see there are more than 100 companies or associations are very active in the digital agenda, and there are different point of views on how DSA and DMA should look like. So it won't be easy. It won't be easy for the governments. It won't be easy for the presidencies to have the discussion. So that's why we actually think it will take long enough for the Czech presidency also. And one of the risks that we saw before is, and this is my personal opinion, that every time there was a regulation which was aiming towards a few companies, it always affected also the others. It affected the smaller businesses in some way. And so this is something I'm afraid of, that it will harm the digital single market. But on the other hand, there are the benefits. I mean, Czech Republic is number one in the e-commerce, and not only in the European Union, I think even worldwide per citizen. So it may be beneficial with us taking us closer to really have the digital single market as was the original idea. So there are benefits, but I see a lot of potential risks there also. But I will tell you more next time we see each other after maybe more thorough discussions within the computer industry.
Okay, yes, I take your word for granted. Michal Kardoš, before we go to Slido questions, because we got a couple, and if you have, please feel free to log into Slido, fill in the hashtag DSA-DMA. Michal, aims and objectives of the discussion that is going to be upcoming. So we've already heard there are plenty of expectations. The actual state of it we will see tomorrow. We already know where to look first. If we are a company, if we are a customer, where to look first, what to seek for. Maybe what is the expectation when it comes to costs. But further on, as it was also outlined, we will have national discussions. We will have a dialogue, and that dialogue will be very much necessary, especially for a country as ours. What should be, in your opinion, the aims and objectives for that upcoming dialogue?
Yes, I think we've already mentioned many of those things, but so let me maybe wrap up before the questions from Slido. I think definitely we should lead a thorough discussion with all relevant stakeholders, the government, the industry, consumer representatives, academia, and so on. That's what we are doing today. Also, I can say on behalf of SAPIE, we are prepared to be a partner to the government and actively participate in the process. As Mr. Repa said, they will be releasing a survey with the company, so we are ready to be involved in this activity and to share it also with our members. And I'm sure also that AmCham is ready to do so. We see that there is relatively low understanding among companies in Slovakia, and this is something that we've noticed also during the summer, when we were preparing our position into the consultation process. Well, we will do our part to mobilize the industry, and we've been trying to do so, but it will require the efforts of all relevant parties, public and private, to ensure that this impact is understood and that Slovakia can actively participate in shaping this legislation. In doing so, we believe that for small and medium-sized enterprises or medium-sized export-oriented countries like Slovakia, it is best to cooperate at the regional and cross-regional level, and that's why I'm also so happy today that we have our guest from Czech Republic here. We have also participated in coordinated action with trade associations from across the CEE, as I mentioned. So this has to continue. Well, the discussion has to be definitely on the national level, a very wide discussion, but also international or regional discussion. and together the voices of pro-innovation countries have a bigger weight, definitely, and especially in the light of the UK's departure from the EU, as has been said today. Because the UK as the long-term innovation advocate, it will be all the more important that these voices are heard in the Brussels debate, definitely. And also, I think that the representatives of the Slovak business and the Slovak business associations, industries, should be heard in Brussels, definitely. So this is our part of the job that we have to do. Otherwise, the future of the digital economy, including in Slovakia, will be decided by one or two big members advocating the interests of their own industry. So let's get involved, and that's my maybe my message and
definitely.
Statement. Yes.
So let's keep on being active. We will be also active involving the participants. Still there is a space. We have about 10 minutes to wrap up our discussions, but I would like to mention the questions that came in. If you have more questions, please still type them on Slido with hashtag DSA-DMA. Now I don't even remember that correctly. Anyway, let's get into it. Do we have in Slovakia a platform where we can discuss and exchange opinions between businesses, academia, and government? Maybe Michal, you may even know the answer to that question. You in SAPIE are offering this kind of platform?
Yes, we offer this kind of platform, and together with AmCham.
Yes.
When it comes to this specific topic of DSA and DMA, I think at the moment maybe there are also some other associations, and it is important for us to join the forces. So whoever is interested in giving us some suggestions on proposals to the further discussions, we are open to discuss it with any company. So feel free to contact us, and we can then share our views with the representatives of the government or from with the Ministry of Investments.
Yes, and Mr. Repa, are you planning to organize some kind of public discussion that would be involving industry, maybe even customers, academia, in order to discuss the legislation that will be presented tomorrow?
That sounds like a good idea, and we have a plan. But let me first reiterate the following, that we really, and this is the response to some of the questions what appeared on your screen through Slido. Slovakia started, let's say, internal inter-service consultations, which were quite unofficial, between the key ministries like Interior Ministry, Culture Ministry, Economy Ministry, let's say some Slovakian supervision authority towards the consumer protection, and others, before actually preparing our preliminary views and the positions. You know well that in October there was informal ministerial council on the telecommunications. The formals are quite problematic today because of the COVID pandemic, so everything is actually managed through online platforms, and having that, we had a series of discussions, so we had to prepare, but we have to distinguish the preparations and orientations for public authorities and for private stakeholders and the private companies. And for this, European Commission prepared public consultations, which were quite open over summer months. So we are aware that more than 2,800 responses altogether arrived. Some of those were of a Slovak origin. We don't know which ones because it hasn't been officially revealed. But we may think that there were some quite active, and maybe SAPIE would know in more details on that. But this is it. So the formal positions are actually governed by legislative procedure. And everybody, even academia or private companies, and or maybe from other ministries, and definitely they are, can join so-called inter-service consultation, which will follow in January. So everybody actually can have a say, even the physical persons, not the bodies. So I think that is a quite transparent process. After that, we will evaluate, we will prepare final position, which will be pursued with the government, where the national government MPs would actually have a say on that, and in the end, they will give approval for our officials in Brussels and us as officials in Bratislava to keep negotiations with other partners. So this is in general, in a nutshell, a brief description of how the fixed system works.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. This was also the response to the second part of the question that we received regarding how this Slovak position will actually be created. We also have a question from Jakub Kucharczyk from Facebook. He is asking on the DMA, does it make sense to subject companies that are diverse to the same rules, for instance, blacklists? Do the speakers think there should be flexibility? Maybe Mr. Husovec can respond to that.
I don't know. Maybe Mr. Stefanec would have also something to share with this. But I can. I don't necessarily see the problem. I mean, blacklisting is a technique that we use in consumer law, and for commercial practices. Or there's a blacklist. There's a gray list, and I don't necessarily see why that as a legislative technique couldn't work also for digital markets. So I don't necessarily see what is exactly the problem. Self-preferencing or data sharing and these kind of obligations, if they come up, or interoperability, obviously wouldn't be applied in the same way as the question of unsolicited advertising is applied differently in the offline or online context, or with respect to different types of sellers selling different products. So I don't see what exactly is the problem there, but it's a totally legitimate technique, basically, where you don't want to specify, when you cannot specify everything that should be illegal, you specify something that is illegal for sure, something that is possibly problematic, but you want to see more effects, and then something that you want to see as definitely legal. So I don't see a problem there. Maybe Mr. Stefanec has something.
Yeah, Mr. Stefanec, maybe some reaction from you. We're talking about the companies that are diverse but should be subjected to the same rule. It's already applied in other sectors, but maybe is this debate somehow ongoing at the European level?
Yes, it is ongoing. I have to say I'm in agreement with Mr. Husovec, because the same rules should be applied to everybody. If we talk here about competition rules, we have to have really stable, clear rules, but they should be applied to everybody. So honestly, I don't see a lot of flexibility here. I expect that if we have clear and stable rules, it is helpful for all the players. They can expect, they can provide, say, more business views for the future. They can have some stability. So I think it's better for business, and at the end, it's better for consumer as well.
But there will be, for instance, we mentioned this ex-ante competition rule. This will be particularly targeted to the bigger companies. Aren't they going to be disadvantaged by that?
Well, we don't know yet if they are going to be disadvantaged. You are right. It's a matter of fact that they have to allow to share this business space. Also, they will be pushed also by interoperability principles. Also, they have to share more data, etc. But it will be the same for small players if some small players would like to be connected to the small platform. So that's my point, that rules must be applied to everybody. I know it is not the case now for big players, therefore it's a legitimate question, particularly from big players, but the rules must be applied for everybody the same.
Yes, I get the point. We've already replied to the questions on the discussion that will be in Slovakia, but the last question that we have is regarding the platform for CEE D9 Plus. We've already mentioned this one. Is this topic for the V4 as well? Whether the D9 Plus is the topic for V4, and would that be an effective platform for cooperation in EU talks? Mr. Repa, you mentioned before that there is the discussion is ongoing. You also raised your hand, so you want to add something. Yes, please.
Thank you. Well, I can only add that Visegrad for Alliance for Digital has never been, let's say, a real, solid, quite powerful platform, as we already converged our ideas in the like-minded groups. Maybe except of Hungary, they were a little bit not always on the same page, and they had different priorities, but in many of cases, actually, we had the same voice. As regards Visegrad 4, it all depends on the actual presidency, which is rotating from year to year, and that given that the program of the presidency, I think that the Polish partners were quite, let's say, active and dynamic, and they were looking for common grounds to take. It might be a nice, let's say, part for the forthcoming Slovak presidency, and when the time comes, and why not? It might be a nice one. We will try. Visegrad 4, unfortunately, has some negative connotation as regards the, you probably know, you all know, on the migration issues and on the asylum processes, which were quite negative. So irrespective of this, we can be quite constructive and structural as regards shaping our common notion. CEE and D9, well, CEE is a Central Europe. I think that's this has been already mentioned, and D9, Slovakia is not there for some strange reasons, but this was actually the process managed in past in the capitals. It was not done through Brussels. I'm not sure whether this let's say structure is solid enough, let's say, to overcome quite dynamic Brussels brother. But let's see.
Do you think that there is a possibility that Slovakia would be joining this?
If we are about to receive invitation, I'm not sure whether the process is formal, but hopefully that D9, to my knowledge, is governed from Sweden or from Copenhagen. If Scandinavians are about to send us some invites, we may, of course, consider that, and we are ready, of course, to cooperate on the issues where we can have a common opinion.
Mr. Stefanec, do you think that such platform as D9 is going to be effective, for instance, when such platform comes to Brussels, when such countries are connected, when, for instance, Slovakia is seeking for more partners? Is this going to have larger effect on the strength of the country and the industry that it represents?
Well, every kind of cooperation is helpful. So in this case, it's very good that we've heard today about the cooperation among CE countries. So it is definitely stronger position now. Also, it is the same case in terms of D9, but it is, of course, the decision of Slovak representatives whether to participate or not. But I'd like to raise one point here. First of all, every kind of cooperation is helpful, but in terms of DSA and DMA, I do not see any different split or any problems between big ones and smaller ones. I mean, member states. There is not a lot of differences. There are the differences between political groups in the parliament. So my recommendation would be for lobbies and also for business communities to not really target different states, but if we have some coalition, it's good, but try to target different political groups, because very often they have different opinion also about these pieces of legislation. It was very much visible in copyright directive, for example, that political groups have been split. So this is how European Parliament works, and as we know, European Parliament will be quite important in this decision-making process. Thank you.
And you kind of played for my last question for all of the participants. What do you think, all of you, one by one, would be the main element in order to find the really future-proof legislation, especially from the point of view of the institution that you are representing? Let's start with Mr. Husovec. Excuse me, Mr. Husovec.
Okay, so since I don't represent anyone but myself,
That's why I'm starting with you.
I have the easiest job. There's no one's going to calling me saying you said something wrong. So the question. Sorry, now I lost the thread. What was the question?
The future. What will be the main element in order to find out the future-proof legislation to really
Okay.
end up with the discussions that are going to come for the next months, and then really have something that will last as e-commerce lasted 20 years?
I think it's going to boil down to the legislative design. So we have to be smart about the way we draft the legislation. And that means that we shouldn't try to be too prescriptive, but rather perhaps open-ended, which I think is what the DMA is trying to do with ex-ante rules. But I hope that also DSA will try to do with its rules about tackling illegal content. So I think it's a legal technique. That's why also I'm actually not negative at all about blacklisting and graylisting. I think those are good devices. And I think on the DSA front, on tackling illegal content, it's very important that we approach the entire problem. I've been preaching this for years as a problem of incentives. So we'll never resolve the problem of illegal content or over removal of legal content. If we try to deal with it prescriptively, we have to solve it as a incentive problem, and that is make it unattractive for companies to take down content that is legal and that should remain on the platforms, as well as make it not so interesting for them to carry content that it's illegal. And there are ways that you can do this. There are all kinds of solutions that academics have proposed over the years. I think that's crucial. Attack incentives, and because business models change. But incentives don't.
Good. Attack incentives. Michal Kardoš?
Well, I would say that the new legislation should be forward-looking, should not be very restrictive, and what is, according to our association, the most important, should bring us legal certainty. So that's, if we agree on these maybe three principles, then we hopefully find some good solution for the business.
Sounds very open as well. Mr. Ondřej Ferdus?
Thank you. Well, we believe that the European businesses need legal clarity and a workable regulatory framework. So an overly broad legislation with an unclear scope would cost time and money that many of our members and especially SMEs simply don't have. So we would, I would say, we need thorough impact assessments. We need thorough discussions on national and also on the European level, and we need to not to over-regulate and having space for innovation. Then we can have a regulation for another 20 years. So set up some ground rules, but not to over-regulate the whole space.
Not to over-regulate. Mr. Radoslav, Repa?
Actually, I can fully subscribe. One nice example was e-commerce directive. I said it in the beginning that something which actually lasts in this quite super dynamic world, 20 years, is quite future-proof. And if we look on what is going to happen tomorrow, if this is the true, and the case is that the new legislation is in the very similar. Is written in the very similar tune as some leaks, which were actually quite scattered over this weekend. We have to say that this is all about 2 or maybe 4 articles out of the e-commerce directive from 12 to 14, which is actually the mere conduit, caching and hosting, and we need to, of course, to specify this notice and takedown action based on the court judgments over the years, actually, and new prejudices actually happening every day wherever in the world. Maybe one risky issue is a one-size-fits-all for the big giants, as let's say companies with the significant market power in the telecoms regulation. They have always a different, let's say, focus than the regular OTTs or maybe others. And the second is some exterritoriality principle, which haven't been, let's say, properly discussed in this forum because of the time. but I would be in person quite interested in knowing what would happen and how will the European Union enforce, let's say, the platforms which are established outside of the European territory and which do not have a legal representative in our office and let's say breach the law. So let's see tomorrow what will happen.
Absolutely, this is going to be a large piece of legislation which not only European Union is expecting, but it may be really setting up some standards for the rest of the world as well. Mr. Stefanec, last word, but not least, absolutely from Brussels.
Yes, we have to have clear and stable rules. We have to have simple rules, understandable rules for everybody, which will be important particularly for SMEs. SMEs have created 80% of jobs in the European Union in last 5 years, and they will be creating most jobs also in the near future. So it's very important that SMEs will be comfortable and this legislation will work for them. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, all of you, for your inputs. We've really heard that the dialogue is going to be very much crucial. This dialogue for upcoming months really need to involve industry, need to involve academia, and need to really breach this gap between the industry and customers part and the governmental part. So this is what we are expecting within upcoming months. It needs to be an active dialogue, we've heard. It needs to discuss definitions, competitive rules, protection of small and medium companies, especially in the countries like in Slovakia, which mostly consist of those. The dialogue will be that much more interesting as well as important. National as well as multinational levels will have to be involved. Cooperation seems to be the key, as always. Open legislation, innovation allowing legislation, and the legislation that will actually bring evolution, not revolution, as you, Michal, said. Those are the expectations from the CEE. We will see much more tomorrow. Everybody definitely should look up for those two legislations. And we will definitely be also discussing this in the future, probably already in January. Thank you very much, everybody, for participating. Mr. Ivan Stefanec, Mr. Radoslav Repa, Mr. Martin Husovec, Mr. Ondrej Ferdus, and Michal Kardoš, everybody, and all of you participants for watching, listening, and sending us questions. And definitely thank you to Sapie and Amcem for organizing. We are looking forward to the next discussion. Happy Christmas, everybody. Happy New Year, and see you next year in the next discussion. Have a good day.
Super.